Good evening and welcome to NTD UK News. I'm Stuart Lees and here are today's top stories. Prime Minister Boris Johnson pledges support to the Belarusian opposition leader at Downing Street.
We remain committed to supporting Belarusian civil society, democracy, human rights.
And official figures show last year, nearly 4,600 deaths in England and Wales were related to drug poisoning, the highest in nearly 30 years. The Belarusian Olympic sprinter who plans to seek refuge in Europe after accusing team officials of trying to force her to leave the Tokyo Games early, says officials from her country made it clear she would face punishment if she returned to Belarus. NTD's Boris has more on this.
The International Olympic Committee said on Tuesday it has launched an investigation into the incident involving the Belarusian Olympic athlete that has rocked the Games.
We need to establish the full facts. We need to hear everyone involved. That obviously can take time. And in the meantime, obviously, our first concern is for the athlete.
Sprinter Kristina Timonoskaya took refuge in the Polish embassy in Tokyo on Monday. That's a day after refusing her team's orders to board a flight home from the Olympic Games. She'd been due to compete in the women's 200-metre heats. Warsaw has offered her a humanitarian visa. Timonoskaya shared on Tuesday what Belarusian officials told her.
They made it clear that upon return home I would definitely face some form of punishment.
She said officials hustled her to the airport and tried to put her on a plane back to Belarus. That's after she'd criticised the management of her team on social media. Timonoskaya says safety is her priority right now.
For now, I just want to safely arrive in Europe, meet with people who have been helping me, and make a decision what to do next.
But she says she hopes to keep competing.
I would very much like to continue my sporting career because I'm just 24. And I had plans for 2 more Olympics at least.
Belarus's authoritarian government has relentlessly targeted anyone even mildly expressing dissent, since a presidential election a year ago triggered a wave of unprecedented mass protests. A source at the Belarusian Sports Solidarity Foundation, which supports athletes jailed or sidelined for their political views, told the Reuters news agency that Timonoskaya plans to request asylum in Germany or Austria. Earl Rhodes, NTD News.
A Belarusian activist who helped his countrymen flee persecution was found dead in the Ukrainian capital this morning. Local police say they are treating it as murder. NTD's Joy Duguid has more.
Early Tuesday, Belarusian activist Vitaly Shizhov was found hanged in a Kiev park not far from his home. A murder investigation has been launched. Ukrainian police say they are looking at the possibility that the killing had been made to look like suicide. Shizhov's friends say the 26-year-old was murdered by the Belarusian regime.
Based on the circumstances and specific threats, it was clear that these were the actions of the Belarusian special services. And this is murder. Vitaly was found, hanged and beaten.
Shizhov was forced to move to Ukraine in 2020 after taking part in anti-government protests. In Kiev, he ran an NGO that helps Belarusians who had fled to Ukraine with their legal status, accommodation and employment. His colleagues say he had felt under constant surveillance, and his group had been warned about possible attempts to kidnap or murder him. He was reported missing by his partner on Monday when he didn't come home from a run.
Vitaly is a bright, kind, cheerful and freedom-loving person. He was a hero of Belarus. He was another victim of the bloody dictatorial regime of Belarus.
That was Yuri Lebedev, friend of Belarusian activist Vitaly Shizhov, ending that report by Joy Duguid. Next, the Prime Minister told the Belarusian opposition leader that the UK is very much on your side and supportive of what you are doing. They met at Downing Street earlier today.
We are committed to supporting human rights and civil society in Belarus. And
You know that the United Kingdom since the very beginning supported us. And moreover, the United Kingdom is supporting Belarus many years already.
Johnson noted sanctions the UK placed on the Belarusian regime, including leader Alexander Lukashenko last year after rigged presidential elections. Further sanctions on regime members came in June this year after the forced landing of a Ryanair plane to detain a journalist on board. The opposition leader fled Belarus in August 2020 following the disputed election under pressure from Belarusian authorities. And in other news, the Office for National Statistics say drug-related deaths in England and Wales have risen for the 8th year in a row. They are at their highest level in more than a quarter of a century. NTD's Ana Rodriguez has more on this.
The Office for National Statistics, or ONS, says nearly 4,600 deaths related to drug poisoning were registered in England and Wales in 2020. This is the highest number since records began in 1993 and up nearly 4% on 2019. Among them, 3,000 were related to drug misuse, nearly 2,200 male and over 800 female. Around half the drug poisonings involved opiate and nearly 800 involved cocaine. Figures show drug-related deaths have risen 60% in the past decade, from 50 deaths per million in 2010 to 80 per million in 2020. The highest rate of drug misuse deaths were found in those aged 45 to 49 years, closely followed by those aged 40 to 44 years. The ONS figures show a clear north-south divide. The northeast experienced the highest rate at 101 deaths per million, 3 times higher than the lowest rate, London, at 33 deaths per million. The ONS say the northeast has had the highest rate of drug misuse for 8 years and has a significantly higher rate than the rest of England. Responding to the figures, support groups say the rise is a public health emergency and call for the government to wake up following years of cuts to addiction services. Separate figures released last week showed over 1,300 drug-related deaths in Scotland last year. The country continues to have the worst drug death rate in Europe. Ana Rodriguez, NTD News.
Some academics say they've experienced a form of cancel culture, including censorship on social media and even losing their job. NTD's Jane Worrell speaks with a health expert in Belgium who was labelled an anti-vaxxer, then got fired.
There are growing concerns over the censorship of debate around lockdown and vaccination policies. A public health expert in Belgium tells us he lost his job after questioning the measures. He's as concerned about the effect the censorship could have on open scientific discussions.
Normally, if we look at science, you have thesis, antithesis, and you come to a synthesis. And this is the basis of science. Not everybody has to agree. That's what keeps science progressing. That's what keeps science growing. And that's what we need to keep evolving in science. You need debate. You need to discuss with each other. You need to discuss different viewpoints. And this leads to new ways of thinking.
He wrote an open letter last August signed by more than 1,500 people in the medical and scientific field, saying the lockdown policy was a disproportionate response to the virus. It called for a double-up approach to vaccinate the elderly and people with underlying health conditions and to have the virus circulate among the healthy population to achieve natural or herd immunity. It's similar to a petition spearheaded 2 months later by UK and US scientists called the Great Barrington Declaration, which was signed by more than 14,000 medical and public health scientists. Earlier this year, Brocken made newspaper headlines following a national TV debate. He questioned an expert who said vaccinated people are unable to transmit the virus. He says his university came under pressure and it led him to be fired.
What happened was I questioned this during the debate, and the debate was foreseen to be taking 25 minutes, and I was there for the last 2 teams. Well, we reached the 3rd team, and suddenly the program was stopped, and debate was stopped, ended, and I didn't even get to the points that I was invited for in the debate. And that was it. And the next day I was all over the press and was put aside as an anti-vaxxer, which I'm not. My children are vaccinated for every child vaccine they ever needed. Same for me. But in this case, we also had doubts about the speed in which the vaccines were developed. We had a lot of concerns. We still have today.
It's been difficult to bring similar concerns to the fore in the UK. Toby Young, who co-founded the Free Speech Union and is associate editor of The Spectator, says the attempts of censorship in science are alarming.
Professors who've expressed dissenting points of view about lockdown, people like Michael Levitt, Sunetra Gupta, Carl Hennigan, Jay Bhattacharya, they've found themselves not quite cancelled, though I think in Michael Levitt's case, an invitation to attend a conference was withdrawn. But sometimes their YouTube videos have been removed by YouTube, their accounts have been suspended by Twitter. A piece written by Carl Hennigan and Tom Jefferson for The Spectator about the Danish mask study was flagged as inaccurate on Facebook. And we've seen the very weapons used to silence dissenters in other areas now being deployed to silence dissenters within the hard sciences, and that's a really alarming development, I think.
Freedom of speech is critical to healthy debate, but it's something that's been lacking when talking about pandemic restrictions. Many people will be hoping for more open debates as we emerge from this crisis in the months and weeks ahead. Jane Werrell, NTD News, London.
Still to come, Scotland will lift most of the remaining COVID restrictions from Monday. But in some settings, people still need to wear masks. That and more after the break. Under pressure from business and unions, the government has dialed down the NHS COVID-19 app to reduce the number of people who are forced to isolate. NTD's Eddie Aiken has the details.
After weeks of protests from businesses and unions, the government agreed to tweak the NHS app. The Department of Health says changes to the app will result in fewer people being told to isolate. This comes after a labour shortage, caused by a large number of workers having to isolate. While the app would previously instruct close contact 5 days prior to a positive test to isolate, it will now look back only 2 days. Health Secretary Sajid Javid says the update will reduce the disruption that self-isolation can cause for people and businesses, while ensuring we're protecting those most at risk. Though most lockdown restrictions have been lifted, self-quarantine rules will remain in place until August the 16th. During the week to July 21st, the NHS app sent out a record nearly 700,000 alerts in England and Wales. Businesses have been under strain as large numbers of workers are pinged by the app and have to isolate. Last month, Downing Street said there were no plans to tweak the app, but it was forced to shift its position to get the Pingdemic under control. Shadow Health Minister Liz Kendall says the public need clarity and certainty, not chaos and mixed messages. The British Beer and Pub Association welcomes the change. It says up to 1,000 pubs have been forced to close temporarily due to large numbers of staff being pinged. Trade union Unite says the change does not go far enough, repeating its call for the automotive and steel sectors to be exempt from isolation rules. Eddie Aiken, NTD News.
Scotland will lift most of the remaining COVID restrictions from Monday. But the announcement came with a warning from First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, who said declaring freedom from or victory over this virus is premature. NTD's Al Rhodes has the story.
Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says the country can move beyond level 0, the lowest level of a 5-tier system of restrictions in Scotland, from Monday. She told the Scottish Parliament most of the remaining legally imposed restrictions would be lifted, including on physical distancing and limits to the size of social gatherings. And venues such as nightclubs will be allowed to reopen.
While this move will restore a substantial degree of normality it is important to be clear that it does not signal the end of the pandemic or a return to life exactly as we knew it before COVID struck. Declaring freedom from or victory over this virus is, in my view, premature.
She warned there's no guarantee that restrictions lifted this coming Monday won't return again in the future. Sturgeon says the country is considering a vaccine pass for use at home as well as by those travelling abroad.
Presiding Officer, I can also confirm that we continue to consider very carefully the possible, albeit limited, use of COVID status certification for access to certain higher risk venues in future.
From Monday, close contacts of those who test positive will no longer be required to self-isolate for 10 days. Such people can choose instead to take a PCR test if double vaccinated. But some restrictions remain for students and teachers in schools. Secondary school pupils will still be told to wear masks during lessons, and staff will need to maintain 1 metre social distancing. These measures are here to stay in place for at least 6 weeks after the holidays. Both groups in Scotland will also be asked to take a lateral flow test before they return. Earl Rhodes, NTD News.
Following thousands showing up at banned protests in Berlin and mass arrests, the Epoch Times spoke with the founder of the largest anti-lockdown group in Germany. He says in the capital, the government uses excuses to ban protests critical of its policies. NTD's Trevor Piper has more on this.
Berlin police say 5,000 people showed up for banned protests against forced vaccination and for basic rights on Sunday. Michael Bellweg, on the other hand, estimates that up to 200,000 people came to Berlin. He's the founder of the largest anti-lockdown group in Germany called Querdenken, or lateral thinking. The courts argued the protests would endanger public health since attendees were expected to break hygiene rules. Bellweg disagrees.
In Berlin, it is actually the case that if it is critical of the government, it is also banned.
Police say the banned protests led to multiple clashes, almost 1,000 arrests and 75 injured officers. One protester died from a heart attack during an arrest. Prior to the ban, Bellweg's group had registered the largest protest, with over 22,000 expected to attend. 6 other protests were banned too.
Fadenscheinigen Argument aus meiner Sicht verboten.
In my view, protests are banned with a flimsy argument, because the content is what it's all about, and the content is simply criticism of the government.
Handelt es sich halt Regierungskritik.
A spokesperson for the Interior Ministry on Monday defended the ban.
We have also always had this experience in the Office for the Protection of the Constitution, that right-wing extremists try to appropriate these events for themselves. Fortunately, they haven't quite succeeded yet.
Bellweg says he feels divisions in Germany have lessened.
Also für mich ist es jetzt persönlich so, nach meiner
In my experience in Berlin, I don't experience such a big social division anymore. And that is perhaps also the reason why the federal government is taking such massive action against lateral thinkers, freedom-loving people, fundamental rights, advocates, whatever you want to call them.
Wie auch immer man die nennen möchte, vorgeht.
He says this is in contrast to the official narrative conveyed by the media. Trevor Piper, NTD News.
A museum in West Russia displays a mysterious wooden idol. A peat bog kept it intact for 11,000 years, making it twice as old as the pyramids and Stonehenge. NTD's Costemines brings us this report.
The Shigir idol is the oldest known wooden work of ritual art in the world. On display at a museum in West Russia, it towers over visitors at over 3 meters. It was originally over 5 meters, but part of it was lost.
In 1997, an attempt was made for the first time to date the idol. It was done using the method of radiocarbon analysis, and the date received, 9,500 years, surprised researchers very much and raised a lot of questions.
In 2014, a group of German scientists found the idol could be even older, dating back over 11,000 years. That's twice as old as the Egyptian pyramids and Stonehenge.
To understand the whole value of the find, one needs to understand that 11,500 years ago, when the idol existed and was used for its intended purpose, was the end of the Ice Age and the beginning of the Holocene. That is the climatic period in which we now live.
The wooden sculpture was found in 1890 by gold miners in Shigir peat bog in the Urals. In ancient times, a lake system existed at this place, formed more than 11,000 years ago. The lake turned into a peat bog, and scientists say this preserved the idol.
If it had not fallen into the lake, and then the lake had not turned into a peat bog, then the idol would not have survived. If it had just fallen onto the bank, somewhere on sandy loam or just on the shore of the lake, it would have simply decayed in several thousand years and would not have reached us.
During gold mining at the turn of the 20th century, hunting equipment, fishing tools and houseware were found in the peat. Whether the peat bogs hold other ancient artifacts remains a mystery, but researchers hope this is not the last find in the region. Kostemenes, NTD News.
And a story to lift the spirits now. The largest species of truly wild horse gave birth last month at a zoo in Bedfordshire. The foal of this rare and endangered species is now finding its feet. It was born on July the 17th and is just beginning to explore her surroundings with her mother Charlotte. The Przewalski is the only species of horse considered truly wild, as it is not descended from domesticated horses. These horses, bred at Whipsnade Zoo, were successfully reintroduced to Mongolia to save the then extinct in the wild species. The Zoological Society of London says there are now hundreds of wild Przewalski horses living in Mongolia, Ukraine and China, and their population is increasing. That's the news for today, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Stuart Lace. Thank you for watching our daily news show on YouTube. You can also watch our other programming on channel 190 on Sky TV or on Freeview via channel box on channel 271. In the meantime though, please give this video a like and hit subscribe to our channel. Have a good day.